Okay, so now we are going to actually integrate Allegro, the Allegro library, for the first time, and that's going to enable us to do some really interesting stuff later on. Of course, right now we're still going to do really boring stuff. What we're going to do is just write a program that's going to display an error message, but we're going to do that using Allegro, and in that way I can illustrate for you how you integrate Allegro into Visual Studio. And so we're going to start this time from an absolute scratch, absolutely no code at all to begin with. We're going to write everything from the ground up. And the other thing I want to mention here is we're going to call this starter because we're going to keep working on this same code for the next, I think, several chapters. At the end, we will have a fully functional, very simple, but fully functional psychology experiment that runs and does, presents very simple stimuli, collects behaviors from the participant, records their reaction time, whether they were correct or not, all that kind of stuff. So we're working toward that. But to just start, we're going to open up Visual Studio. We're going to create a new project. And this is going to be an empty project, C++, empty project, C++. And the name again, I'm going to call this starter. And create. All right, and because we chose to create a blank project, we don't even have any code at all. In fact, we don't even have a file to write code. So the first thing we're going to do is create a file where we can write our code. And so we're going to go over here to the right underneath the solution here. You see starter, and here is the several folders with stuff for our project. We're going to go to source files, this last folder, right click, that's a right click on it, and add new item, and choose a C++.cpp file and add that. And by default it's going to name it source, and we can change that, but source is fine as a name for this file, so we'll just keep it named source for now. You can change yours if you want. I think to change it you just right click here, and I believe somewhere here, yeah, right there, rename. You can name it something more clever if you want, but I'll just keep it source. And then now to actually integrate Allegro, we're going to come here and right click on starter, and we're going to find manage NuGet packages right here. So Allegro, and there's a lot of other of these libraries and other kind of sources for C++ integrated with Visual Studio, and it all comes through now this NuGet thing. And I don't really understand what NuGet is. All I know is this is how you add Allegro. All right, so you click on that Manage NuGet Packages, and it defaults to show you what's installed. None are installed yet. We're going to click on Browse here, and then type in Allegro. And the very first hit should be Allegro by Allegro developers, and you can see here it's version 5.2.6. That's the latest as of this video. You may be looking at slightly different numbers than that, but it should, for the next few years at least, still be version 5. And whatever it is, the latest version, that's what we're going to do. So click on that. You get an option over here to install, and go ahead and do that. And it's going to give you a warning, hey, you're about to make a change to this solution, but that is in fact what you want to do. So click OK, and give it a couple of minutes and it'll install Allegro for you. You can see down here, you can kind of monitor what's happening, and it's adding these packages. Let's see, we should get a message. Yeah, installed. Okay, so now we're good to go. I can actually close this NuGet thing there, and now you can see here, now we have packages underneath source, and that tells us that the Allegro library is now installed for us. All right, so now to build some code from the ground up, the very first thing we're going to do is, give me 1 second because I got to look up my cheat sheet here. We need to, of course, include at least one header file, and the header file that we're going to start with is iostream as usual, and then we're going to create a main function, and we'll make it an integer. So int main, open and close parens, and then the curly brackets for whatever the contents of main is going to be. Okay, and I'm actually at this point going to try and run this it's not going to do anything, but I just want to make sure that we don't have any errors. And I also mainly want you to get into the good habit of compiling early and often. All right, so I just clicked on my local Windows debugger to run it. Of course, Windows debugger opens up this window. The program itself would, whatever it did, would have been right here. This program doesn't actually do anything, so I just get this window. But I didn't get an error. That's the important part. So I want you to get into the habit of compiling early and often because, or at least clicking this debugger to run early and often, because it's a lot easier to find a bug in the last 2 or 3 or 4 lines of code that you just wrote than in the last 500 or 10,000 lines of code that you just wrote. So often when you're coding, if you write like 3 or 4 lines of code and then you need to repeat that code a lot, you can just copy and paste it. And if you do all that and copy and paste it a bunch of times, you can literally come up with thousands of lines of code. And if you had a bug buried in there and you didn't test it, now you've got thousands of bugs in your program. Or if you just write a whole bunch of code and there's just some stray thing going wrong in there somewhere, it can take a long time and be a very painful process to find that. Whereas if it's just the last 2 or 3 things you wrote, since you last had a successful run of your program, it's usually relatively easy to find those bugs. So compile early and often. All right. Now, we actually want to start adding the stuff that we need to use Allegro. And the first thing that we have to do is use an Allegro header file in addition to this IOStream header file. So we're going to pound include, and it's a little bit different because Allegro 5 is installed by this NuGet. We have to actually tell Microsoft Visual Studio how to get to it, and so it's in this Allegro 5 / Allegro.h. So we're just telling Microsoft Visual Studio, look in here in Allegro 5, which is a folder presumably somewhere. I actually have never seen it, probably just because I've never looked for it, but that's where it will find the Allegro header. And so now we are including the Allegro header. Now, once we use Allegro, we actually have to initialize Allegro, and we do that with a command al _ init, and then open and close parentheses, semicolon after that line. That's one of our lines that needs a semicolon, and that will initialize Allegro. And because we have made the main function an integer function, we've got to return something. The function has to return a value. If we don't know what to return, we just usually return the value 0. And now this should be fully functioning. Let's try it again. We'll just run real quick, make sure we don't have any errors, forgotten parentheses or anything. Yeah, it looks like that ran just fine. Of course, this keeps popping up on my second screen, which I'm not recording and capturing for you, so you can't see it when it pops up. I have to drag it over here. But that worked. Okay, and now what we're going to do is just try to make this program present a message to the user. It's going to be an error message. We'll make it an error message. But to do that, we have to use the Allegro native dialog add-on, which Allegro uses a lot of things called add-ons. And so a lot of, the primitives are going to be another add-on that we'll talk about later. But for now, we're just going to use the native dialog add-on. And we do that with this command, pound include. And again, we have to tell it to go look in Allegro 5 for this thing. Allegro native dialog.h, the dialog header. And now we still can't just use the dialogues because we've included the dialog header. Here's another thing that's kind of funny about using Visual Studio. We're going to have to set the Allegro in Visual Studio to use the dialogs add-on. So we come back over here to Starter, our solution here, right-click on it, and come all the way down to Properties. And you should get this Properties window here. And you'll notice if you've installed Allegro properly, you have Allegro 5 options here. And the default for all of the add-ons for Allegro is that it's not using them. So you see over here, there's some slots. You may not be able to see it on my screen, but you should see it on your screen when you bring up this dialog. All blanks here. And what we want to do is click on the dialog add-on over here. When you click on dialog, you see here you get a little arrow off to the far right here. That's because even though it's not visually obvious here, This is a drop-down menu, and if I click on that arrow, I get two choices, yes or no. And the default is no. If it's blank, it's no. We're going to say yes, we do want to use the dialog add-on. Now I'm going to click apply and OK. All right, we're getting closer. Okay, and now in order to use the dialog, we have to put that dialog somewhere. We have to put it on a display. And a display in Allegro is a lot like a variable. It has to be declared. And it's declared with an all caps Allegro underscore display, and then an asterisk or a times symbol. And then we can name it. We can just name it display. Sometimes if you're using multiple displays, you can name them display 1, display 2, and so on. But for now, display by itself is just fine. And now, whenever we create a display, in order to avoid memory leaks, and I talk in the book a little bit more about memory leaks, but in order to avoid a memory leak, we need to make sure that that display eventually gets destroyed. So we do that with, oops, not all caps, underscore AL underscore destroy display, and then we need to tell it what display we want to destroy, and we wanted to destroy the one that we named display. Again, we need that semicolon at the end of that line, and we also need to create the display. So it's not just enough to declare the display. It's kind of like a variable. You need to give it a value. You need to create the display, and we do that with the command, here I'm going to put it one line down, AL underscore, oh sorry, we have to set it to the value display, AL underscore create display, and then we need to give it dimensions. So we're going to give it the dimensions 800 by 600, and that's in units of pixels. So this is just telling it to create the display, make it 800 pixels wide and 600 pixels tall. All right, need that semicolon at the end. And now we are actually ready to put in our message command. And the messaging, the Allegro native messaging command is AL underscore show underscore native underscore message underscore box. This may seem kind of like a pain in the neck. Why don't they abbreviate these commands to make them a little bit shorter to type? But believe me, you don't have to type them all that often. A lot of times you're just copying and pasting code. But spelling out what this function call really is calling in great detail is very helpful in terms of trying to read the code and figure out what the code is doing. It makes it a lot easier to look stuff up too. All right, so this message box needs to display somewhere. We're going to display it in the display. You could also define a buffer that you could put it in that would not be immediately displayed. Sometimes we want to do that. I'll talk about that in some later chapter. Now we need the title of this display. We're going to call it error. And then we need a label or a heading. We're going to call it uh-oh. I'm going to call it uh-oh. You can call yours oops or something like that. Oh, actually, wasn't I going to do that? I think I was going to call this oops. There we go. Oops. Uh-oh. We'll see when this runs. You'll see what it looks like. Okay, then and then the actual message that you're going to display, I'm going to put you goofed right there. And then the next two parameters for this command are the buttons and flags. And for us, for now, both of those are just going to be null. So you're going to, in all caps, just type null, comma, null. Oh yeah, let me point this out too. Notice that each of these parameters, or each of these they call them arguments, is separated by commas. So all comma separated. All right, and then semicolon at the end. And let's see, unless I've forgotten something, I believe we should be good to go. Let's run this and see what happens. So, run. Hey, look at this. Let me drag it over if I can. Uh-oh. Maybe I can't drag it over. I drag that one over. This one doesn't want to drag. Oh, there we go. Hey, look at that. There is our Allegro message. So you can see here that that first thing, the title, goes up here, and then the label, or they call it the header, goes right here, and then the actual message is right here. And this comes natively with an OK button. If I click the OK button, it just goes away. That's it. And then we're just left with the debugger window that, of course, we are familiar with at this point, that you can just hit any key to get out of. All right, that worked. This video has gone on for a little over 15 minutes now, so I think that's long enough. I'm going to go ahead and stop it here. And in the next video, we'll actually create a program that's going to display a shape, what Allegro calls a primitive. All right, see you in the next one.